Thank you for everyone for attending. This is the Arts and Recreation Community Policies Committee dated June 22nd. It is now 6 o'clock. I want to call the meeting to order. Mr. Clark, do we have a quorum?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. We do have quorum. Currently absent from the meeting is Councillor Bohm.
Okay, thank you. First item, approval of agenda. If I could have a mover and a seconder. Councillor Ridge, Councillor Stephen. I need you to put your hand up a little faster than Councillor Amos. No talking back. You're out of order. Call the vote. All those in favor? Passed unanimously. Confirmation of minutes. Have a mover and a seconder. Councillor Amos, Councillor Osanek. All those in favor? Passes unanimously. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, we'll move forward. We have one delegation scheduled. Stephen Sivington. Are you present? Okay. You have 5 minutes if you want to take the podium.
Well, thanks very much for giving me some time here. Talking about Stephen Skivington is actually the pronunciation, talking about the Snyder Park off-leash. And first I'd like to thank the staff for their excellent work. We've been working on this for the last year and a half. And they've put together an excellent report. I'm going to speak just to the Snyder Park aspect of it. My family and I moved to Kingston about 2 years ago to look after my mother-in-law. And I've met many neighbors while walking our dogs. We didn't plan to move into this neighborhood. It was just by accident because we were 2 days from having lived out of a motel after selling our house in Coburg. The actual off-leash dog park wasn't my idea either. Once my neighbors found out my background lobbying governments, they asked if I could help them get a dog park. And just to be clear, I'm doing this as one of my rare freebies that my wife has me do. Turns out that Snyder Park, which is just up the street from where I live, about 4 blocks away, it's a perfect location. The dog park fits into the existing space with minimal disruption. The dog noise is canceled out by the 401, and the kids' play equipment was going to be replaced anyway, so moving it to a little bit to the west, which is what the proposal would not be a hardship. Now, according to the staff report, and again, we had a public consultation, public meetings, all sorts of stuff. In the report itself, 80% of the neighborhood is in favor of the dog park. If that's not a consensus, I don't know what is. One further thing to remember, 90% of my neighbors would walk their dogs to Snyder Park, while I suspect that over 90% would have to drive to the already approved Bell Park. This means Snyder Park would do less damage to the environment than Bell Park. My neighbors, as it turns out, are mostly veterans, either active or retired. Many are suffering from post-traumatic stress syndrome. The smell of marijuana is quite heavy at 6 a.m. when I'm walking my dogs, and all throughout the day. I walk the 2 of them 5 times each. And many of these dogs that we run into are emotional support animals. While the staff report rejecting the Snyder Park off-leash is solid logically, I'm asking this committee to support our request and vote with your emotions. Canada owes our veterans so much and yet have delivered so little. This dog park would go away to help with their healing. Finally, a word about the $300,000 cost. Some might say we shouldn't be spending money on yet another dog park when our city has such a huge homelessness problem. Well, you should know that many of the same people who are fighting for this dog park are also volunteering their time trying to help find a solution to our homelessness problem here in Kingston. You don't have to pick one or the other. We can support a dog park and help the homeless. So thank you for giving me this opportunity to address our concerns, And if there's any questions, I'd be pleased to answer them now.
Thank you. Any questions for committee? Seeing none? Thank you, sir. There are no briefings. Come to business. The first one, A, proposed off-leash dog areas and improvements. Mr. Felwell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to introduce Neil Ensworth, our Manager of Parks and Shoreline, just to give a quick overview of the report in front of the committee this evening. Neil?
Thank you, Luke. So the report before you recommends 3 items. The first recommendation is that the committee recommend to City Council that the Cataraqui West Community Park, which is currently under development, include an off-leash dog area as part of its construction, which is expected to occur predominantly next season. The second recommendation is to not approve a community-requested Snyder Park off-leash dog area, for which we'll provide a brief overview of what the report describes, the rationale of that. And then the third recommendation is to recommend to Council to approve the implementation of 3 new small dog corrals or enclosures that are that would be inside of existing dog parks. So this would be a new service that we don't currently have in the city. So when we go through the staff report, we start off by just explaining the service level of what the city has in our inventory. We have 5 off-leash dog parks in our inventory, and a 6th dog park is approved by City Council to be developed in Bell Park, and that will occur in 2025, subject to budget approval. That takes us to 6. When we look at the average numbers of dog parks for other municipalities, we are approximately 2.5 times the amount of other municipalities in Ontario. When we look at the specific area around the central part of the city, which is where the Snyder off-leash dog park is proposed, we have in that area over 3 times as many dog parks per capita as other municipalities in Ontario on average. The staff report then goes on to talk about the distribution of where our dog parks are, and we have a map. When it's color, there's colored circles, but it shows the distribution of the current 6 approved dog parks. It shows the proposed Cataraqui West Community Park location and the proposed Snyder Park off-leash dog area location as well. And we have a good distribution in the city, in particular in the central core. However, if we had one area of the city to choose from that is lowest level of the poorest level of distribution for this service, it would be in the Cataraqui West or the Woodhaven area. We have Rotary Park down by the water at Lemoyne's Point, and then the next closest park is in Meadowbrook Park, and that's probably one of our highest suburban populations, the Cataraqui West area, and it doesn't have an off-leash dog area in that location. The third paragraph in the report talks about the existing policy, and this is an area that we have been working on since 2009 when the policy was originally approved. And the policy talks about the parameters that are required for dog parks. And it requires that any new dog park be 1.5 to 4 acres in size, no smaller, no larger. Usually the 1.5 acre size is the challenge when community groups request dog parks, because that means you're going to have to take away 1.5 acres of a park that's used for other purposes currently, whether it's open green space or pedestrian connections or playgrounds or whatever. And there's been a number of dog parks over the years been requested by community members, and when we've had those public consultations, we haven't been able to recommend those successfully. Like Oak Ridge Park is a really good example that came before committee in 2012 and was denied for the reasons of just the amount of sheer space that it occupies. The other requirements are to provide parking, because there is a lot of drive-to habit as part of moving your dog to an off-leash dog park area. So we typically will develop a parking lot anywhere from 10 to 20 stalls. That's what we have in the other parks, and it seems to work okay. Some on-street parking can happen, but it must include an off-street parking lot, at least as part of the parking strategy. That adds a little bit to the cost and again, has some impact on the green space. Distance to other park amenities is a requirement that's spelled out. There's a number of different park amenities, including natural areas and playgrounds and neighboring homes, and all of that is spelled out in the policy. So we have to sort of check those boxes, and that would affect how each of these proposals could be well accommodated on the site. And then the policy also actually requires staff to consider, and it requires staff and council to consider the distribution of dog parks. So that is a requirement in the policy, and so we've talked about distribution already. The next paragraph in the report gets into each of the individual recommend items, the first being Cataraqui West Park. So we have been doing public consultation on the new Cataraqui West Park. It's the largest community park that the city's built in well over 20 years, if not close to 30. And it's located west of Bay Ridge Drive and north of Princess Street in the Woodhaven subdivision. It's a 5-hectare park approximately, which is about 15 acres. During public consultation, we had 2 large public meetings, and the number one thing we heard from that consultation was that many members of the community wanted an off-leash dog area because of the lack of them in that part of the city. So in our subsequent public consultations and designs, we showed one. That diagram for the proposed off-leash dog area is included as an exhibit in Exhibit A in the back of the report. And what we were able to do is, because it's a new park that is essentially a meadow right now that isn't used for existing park use, is we were able to design an off-leash dog area that wouldn't compete with the other uses of the park, and it would complement sort of all the other amenities like parking that was already planned to be installed and distance from homes that are, it's quite good in that model. We also are proposing and have agreement from Hydro One to include a portion of the dog park in the Hydro Corridor lands, which further lightens the load on the valuable city-owned park space, and that is consistent with the policy as well. Snyder Park, last year we had a request from a resident to establish an off-leash dog area, and the policy outlines a specific procedure for that. We have to test the proposal based against those criteria we spoke about. And Snyder Park did pass the tests at our initial glance of the site, and had some challenges due to proximity to neighboring homes and general park size, but it was adequately satisfying the requirements of the policy that we moved forward with a public meeting, and that occurred in February, I believe, this year. And there was good support for the park from members of the community who want to see the park happen, and that's typical for a new proposal. We did have a number of concerns that we feel were valid from members of the community, in particular neighboring residents, concerned about noise and safety, and concerns over traffic and all the general things that come with sort of dog parks, and they're outlined fairly clearly in the report. Taking into consideration that we have a very high level of service in this area, that the city overall has a high level of service, and if we were to strategically want to add a new dog park, which city staff are recommending, it would be to be in the west end and not in the central area of the city. Keeping into consideration that the park may potentially not be successful in its configuration as proposed, and it's very difficult to remove a park amenity after one has been established. That was an issue in 2009 in Lake Ontario Park, where there was a pilot program for an off-leash dog area, which council rejected and had removed due to complaints from neighbors, and it was a challenging decision to make at the time. Staff are not recommending this site. Over the last number of years, we have been receiving requests for small dog enclosures. This is our last recommend item. Owners of small dogs are not all as likely to use dog parks for risk of conflict, fear of conflict with larger dogs. So the trends in off-leash dog areas in the last sort of 5+ years have been to add small dog areas inside of a dog park when they're built. So a portion of the park gets sort of fenced off with a separate entrance for owners who have small dogs. And we also find this not just provides safety for the dogs themselves, but sometimes for the owners who may not be as comfortable with large golden retriever bounding around. So we are recommending that three existing off-leash dog areas get small dog enclosures. They would be distributed around the city in Rotary Park, Memorial Center Park, and McLean Trails Park. Those are the sites we get the greatest number of requests for this amenity, and we think that is a way to increase usership in dog parks in general across the city. If the Cataract Way West Community Park was approved in this plan, it would also include a small dog off-leash area, sort of separate inside of it. So we would, at the end of the day, have a nice distribution of 4 across the city. Two of the existing dog parks are not recommended for off-leash dog areas for small dogs, and one is Meadowbrook Park. Naturally, with increasing the usership in a space, we expect to have an increased amount of traffic and noise and all of the things that go along with dog parks. And we have had challenges over the years very regularly in Meadowbrook Park because of the proximity to neighboring homes. We also have a dog park in Grass Creek Park, but it's an anomaly in that it's a very, very, very large park and is more of an agricultural setting, and people use the dog park in a different way. Much more linear dog walking, and the risk of conflict is much reduced in that space, so we're not recommending a small dog enclosure at this time there. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Before I go to questions from the committee, I know we've had a number of conversations in regards to this dog parks after the election, and we've had a number of conversations, and you were very helpful in enlightening me on the difficulties within having a dog park. And one thing you didn't mention is the parameters around like a potential dog park and households, property line. If you could share that, please.
Yes, thank you. That's an area staff would be pleased to have more clarity in the policy on, because there is not a number that tells us how far away from homes we should put dog parks. That being said, we do have experience in the 5 dog parks in our inventory, and we know that Meadowbrook Park, which is 90 meters from people's homes, receives numerous dog noise complaints on an annual basis. It's not to say Snyder Park would have the same acoustic circumstance because the 401 is immediately adjacent, but in the diagram on Exhibit B, for example, the dog park configuration proposed shows 50-meter separation, so less than Meadowbrook Park, to the neighboring homes. The reason that the dog park area has to be at 1.5 acres minimum in size is based on a lot of best practice that was done in the research for the policy development back in just before 2009. And when dog parks are smaller than that in size, if they're fully open to all kinds of sizes of dogs, the operational challenges, the safety of the site, the health of the animals, and the actual ability to maintain the site is greatly reduced. So after having seen the dog parks operate for 14 years, I think we can, and they're all approximately 1.5 acres in size, with the exception of the one in Grass Creek Park I mentioned, can say that 1.5 acres really is a very challenging smaller end of the spectrum, but that's the policy limit. So at 1.5 acres they work, but they would be challenging to be smaller than that. So to give you an idea about 1.5 acres, it's approximately 6,000 square feet. That's approximately 150 feet by 200 feet. In meters, this correspond from that. So I think size is the main issue when you try to locate a dog park, but access to the dog park and separation from neighboring homes and amenities can add up quite significantly. We looked at a number of other dog park requests over the years, including, for example, one in Cataraqui Woods Park recently. And you would have essentially had to remove the entire playground and all of the green space and have a dog park within 25 meters of people's homes in that large community park just to make it fit and satisfy the policy. So some challenges with fitting off-leash dog areas into certain parks, and so sometimes those ones don't even go to the public meeting process because we know they're not going to meet the needs of the policy.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Councillor Amos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. I guess the first question is about the small dog park enclosures. Are we sectioning off existing dog park enclosures, or are we adding more space to the dog parks?
Through you, Mr. Chair. The proposal is to inject the small dog enclosures into the current footprint and to not take up more park space.
Okay, thank you. Would dog owners, and this is really an in the weeds question, and I'm not a dog owner, but would they, is it self-defining small dogs? Or do we have to put a sign up saying what a small dog is identified as?
Yes,
Okay.
through the chair.
You had indicated that our park, we have 3 times per capita for our dog parks, and that you've indicated our 1.5 acres is what we have used as a standard. Is that a provincial standard, or is that a self-identified standard? And is there a provincial standard that we could go by?
Through the chair, I think recalling the work that was done on the policy at the time, there was a tremendous amount of research done on what was working well in other municipalities across Canada. They didn't just research actually the provincial parks. I will say it was a learning curve for every municipality back in the early 2000s on off-leash dog areas. Kingston came in at the right time, I think, and has a very, very consistent size requirement in comparison to other municipalities. So I would say you'd probably find a similar cross-section across all of the province on the successful dog parks that are out there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sanik.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, thank you to staff for this report. I think it's excellent that we're going to be getting the small dog enclosures through this recommendation. Thank you so much for bringing it forward. I know that's basically what we've been hearing about over the last few years. I know that when we got our dog parks, I always heard the rumor that Kingston has, I think, the second most dog parks per capita next to Victoria, BC, in all of Canada. And so what you've proved is we are the highest in Ontario. And I suppose that rumor we're number 2 in Canada is likely correct. Thanks also for the park, dog park going in at Cat West, because I had heard for years that Rotary Park is great for Councillor Stevens' district, but it's still too far for the rest of the West End. And to have one to look forward to at Cat West, that will be good for the people living more on the north side of the West End of the city. I hadn't heard about Snyder Park until I read this report tonight, and the report does remind us about, what was in the grand scheme of things before the pandemic for Bell Park. So I just wanted to ask staff, like Bell Park's only mentioned once in the report. Do we know what year Bell Park, might be getting the dog park? And I'm just thinking in terms of Snyder Park, you know, like if we don't approve Snyder Park tonight, maybe we could, you know, I don't know, start saving up the money. And like, I'm just throwing this out to the committee that maybe we should start saving the money for Snyder Park instead of Bell Park. I just don't know, like, there's no timeline in the report for Bell Park's plan, so I don't know. I don't remember how much money was going to be allocated in the Bell Park master plan for the dog park area. I don't think it was going to be fully enclosed with a fence. It was going to be more like, and Mr. Unsworth, like, you can probably drive my memory here, but I think it was just going to be trees. We were going to try to plant a bunch of trees, naturalize the dog park. So maybe there wouldn't have been very much money in the Bell Park master plan for the dog park area. What do you recall from 2019?
Mr. Falwell?
Thank you, Councillor, and through you, Mr. Chair. So we have identified that the Bell Park next phase would be 2025. So the first phase of the Bell Park is happening this year. We've retained the design team to look at the sport court component and some entrance improvements. So that phase 1A, which council has endorsed. And we'd be providing, for council's recommendation this fall as part of budget deliberations, phase 1B, which would include the dog, off-leash dog area. You are correct in regards to the style of amenity. We would certainly want to finalize that through the public engagement piece when that took place for Bell Park. So, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. So, yeah, we're looking at a $500,000 price tag for Snyder Park. That's really expensive. And, you know, can I just ask one more question to staff? I know that our delegate tonight had mentioned buses with dogs, and I know that we allow pets now on buses, but only to a certain point. Do you know, staff, or else I'll have to ask, well, we don't have Mr. DaCosta anymore. I would have to ask Mr. Semple. I think we only allow pets on buses if they're in a cage. So that would just be a Chihuahua, but maybe we allow dogs on leashes. And then if that case, that would be good because, you know, people can take their dog on the bus then to Bell Park or over to Memorial Center. I'm just asking staff what we allow for dogs on buses.
Not sure this is part of the conversation, but someone want to address that? Mr. Falwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Councillor, I'm not exactly sure on the requirements for traveling on our transit system, but I'd be happy to follow up with Director Semple and provide an update to committee following tonight's meeting so that you have that information in hand in advance of the council meeting.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions from committee? Mr. Clerk, do we have anyone virtual?
Just give me a quick 1 second. There are no members of the public in the public hearing gallery.
Okay, thank you. Could we have a motion and a seconder to put this motion on the floor? Mr. Amos, Councillor Reg, all those, actually, before that, any further comments or debate? Councillor Amos, can you take the chair, please?
I have the chair recognize you.
Thank you. It was mentioned earlier that if approved, Catwoods West would receive a small dog park. There was no mention of Bell Park. That is approved and is being built, scheduled for 2025. Will that include a small dog park as well?
So, thank you. At this time, because the detailed designing of the Bell Park improvements haven't yet begun, we weren't able, nor has the public consultation on those detailed designs yet occurred. We weren't able to confidently forecast the delivery of a small dog enclosure. That being said, staff are in support of the amenity with regards to its ability to make dog parks, more usable by more people and by more dogs. So it will be a priority for us to look at that. But we felt, given the environmental conditions on the site, given that it's a former landfill, and the sensitive nature of the consultations we're likely to undertake in that park, that we would not specifically mention that at this time, but we can also report back on that at a later time.
Okay, thank you. I am glad to hear that Kingston's leading in this area. Dog parks was something I heard a lot about last year, something I really wanted to expand until I spoke with staff regarding the requirements and currently understand the limitations. Because basically, I did want a dog park in every park in my district. Soon to find out, not possible. However, having the addition dog parks will also help with the environment, as residents will have the option to walk or at least drive a smaller distance. So that is appreciated, which touches on another pillar that we have. That's all I have.
I release the chair.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments? Last call. In that case, I'll call the vote. All those in favor of the motion presented? Passed unanimously. On to our next item of business, update on the ice allocation policy. As we play musical chairs.
Yes.
Ms. Turner?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair, we're pleased to be here this evening with report number 23-006, update to the ice allocation policy. The last time that the ice allocation policy was before council was back in 2018 with some reviews. Staff were planning on bringing it in 2020, but a little delayed with the pandemic. So the ice allocation policy is important because it establishes guidelines for the allocation and management of arenas owned and operated by the City of Kingston. So we're here this evening. There was consultation back in May with our community sporting organizations. The changes that are before you that are laid out in Exhibit A are mostly minor in nature. I'm pleased to have with me this evening from the Recreation and Leisure Services team, Amy Gibson, who's our Manager of Recreation Services, Amanda McDonald, Supervisor of Recreation and Community Development, and Dave Flindle, who's our Assistant Supervisor of Recreation Services, who is really our subject matter expert with ice and sports tourism related events. So we're happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Any questions from the committee? Councillor Stephen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. Just two quick ones, please. In the policy for 3.6 seasonal clients, there's a first sentence. The second sentence says examples are men's/ladies hockey leagues. Could we just say adult hockey leagues instead of men's and ladies? Thank you. Okay. The second thing was 3.13.1. It's about prime and non-prime ice. So I understand the first part about equitable distribution. Sounds great. I was hoping someone could maybe sort of explain the second part. I found that part a bit confusing about sort of trading in ice times and that kind of stuff. Could you just explain that briefly, please?
Who would like to take that? Ms. Gibson?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, so Councillor Stephen, that specifically is in regards to if a user group, so a partner group, we could use Kingston Minor Hockey, for example, has specific amount of ice allocated, they are permitted to trade their ice time within their organization. They're not permitted to trade it outside to another organization. And an example of that could be like Greater Kingston versus Kingston Minor Hockey.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. And then there's part about for each hour of morning ice returned and then an hour of prime ice. Can you just explain that part too, please?
Yeah, so there's a specific allocation of morning ice that's provided because that would be considered non-prime ice, ice that's not most favorable versus the primetime ice that starts at 4:30. And so a specific amount of that can be allocated within their allocation.
Okay, I understand that part. There's just, it's the last sentence, I think, and I don't understand it. Once the seasonal ice allocation has been finalized, for each hour of morning ice returned and hour of prime ice will be removed from their seasonal allocation at the discretion of the FBO.
Ms. Turner?
Thanks.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. So what it is, Councillor Stephen, is when the ice allocation policy was first developed back in, I think it was 2008, what we saw was organizations that were giving back the morning ice. Not everybody wants to be at the rink for 6:00 a.m. practice, we get it. But what was happening was they were returning the morning ice and then coming to the city and looking for more non-prime. So what the ice allocation policy does is it states that as per the registration numbers, you have to take so many hours of non-prime, and you also have to take so many hours of prime. So if you're giving back 6 a.m. on Wednesday morning, you're gonna give back an hour of prime time somewhere, somewhere else. So we don't see a lot of it come back that way. It fixed that problem back in 2009. And, the groups use what they have for the most part. If anything, they end up purchasing more.
Okay, thank you. So I think if I'm understanding correctly, it's a case of you can't give back the morning ice and then expect to get later ice times after school, for example. If you're going to give back the morning ice, you're also going to give back some other ice time because you're saying to us you don't need it.
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, that's correct. And what it also does is, because what would happen then is we would have groups advocating for the city to build more arenas, and it would be strictly for primetime use. So it is a fair and equitable allocation. You will see it in a lot of allocation policies throughout the province.
Okay, I understand now. Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Councillor Sanik?
Thank you. I'm just going to an email right now. It was my coworker, and what year was this? I just wondered if we've improved things. She was like a competitive, like an elite figure skater, and she was having problems with rec ice, like the early morning ice. And so what do we do in those cases? Like back in then, so this was in 2016. So I don't know if we've improved things since then. So I'm just checking right now, right? So anyway, her daughter wanted ice early in the morning for practice, and Belleville was offering that. A lot of the other cities were offering that, and Kingston wasn't. And so we do have figure skating teams at the Invista Center. Do we offer early morning ice that, individuals can rent out?
Ms. Turner?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair, thank you, Councillor Osanik, for the question. I think what you're referring to is the city used to offer what we called ticket ice.
Yes.
It was first thing in the morning. It was cheaper to rent. The city actually ran the program. The organizations didn't. The city has gotten out of that, and through fixing the fee structure over, I think it was back in 2019, we brought a report to council for the 2020 rates and fees, and we fixed a lot of those rates, which was feedback that we had received from the groups. We have not had a request for it, but there is ice time available should the figure skating club if they wanted to rent it, we would work with them on that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Amos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. In your recommendations, item 3.14.1 is the Leon Center and special events. Can you expand a little bit on what this is? Because you're proposing a change to the operations at the Leon Center that are reflective in the policy regarding uninterrupted ice and the impact of last-minute changes to special events. Is that referencing the Frontenacs make the playoffs and they go on to the next round and something has to be bumped? Or is this a last-minute event that is being brought to Kingston and it just happens to fall under our lap and then all ice time on that day gets canceled? I'm a bit confused on that.
Ms. Turner.
Through you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for that question, Councillor Amos. So city staff, through Mr. Flindle, have worked really hard to strengthen the relationship that we have with the team at the Leon Center, the ASM Global team. What has happened historically is that there were some occasions where our users would get bumped out at the last minute with not a lot of notice, and I do want to say this isn't recent, so I want to be very clear about that. It was probably back in the 2016, 17, 18 range. And so we've worked to make sure that the communication has improved with the ASM team. It wasn't all about the Frontenacs. There were a few times it was, but we know ahead of time when special events are coming into the Leon Center so that we're able to, if a group does get bumped out, we're able to find them time. I think the majority of the time, probably 98, 99% of the time, at the time that they would normally have in the Leon Center. So just really tidying that up in the allocation policy so that we're making sure that the Leon Center is more reflective or reflected in there because of it being a city-owned asset.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Councillor Amos, take the chair, please.
I have the chair and recognize you.
Thank you. I know I asked the question earlier, but just following up on something Councillor Stephen had mentioned. In regards to the speed skating, I know you mentioned that the governing body hasn't changed their categories, specifically the one midget. Is there any idea if they're going to, or if we could maybe encourage?
Ms. Turner?
Through you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Councillor Shapes. I'm not sure if we've had any conversations recently with the Speed Skating Association about the change in the wording, but we're happy to have a conversation and bring forward the concern so that they can take it forward. I'm assuming they would have to talk to both the provincial and national bodies about it.
Thank you. In regards to 3.14.2, opportunities and restrictions, just to confirm, it can be slightly confusing. Does this mean the potential of up to 4 tournaments or special events total? Because it talks about fall and winter. So are those separate seasons, or are they a season together? So is it 2 each or 2 total? Just for clarification for anyone that's listening. And
Ms. Turner?
Sure. So through you, Mr. Chair, great question. So it's actually, I was just confirming with Mr. Flindle, it is 2 in the fall, so that fall season, and then 2 in the winter that are 72 hours in nature. I know part of your question earlier, Councillor Chaves, was about larger tournaments. There are a few tournaments that are grandfathered in, like the Kids for Kids tournament, which was from the ice storm back in 1998, 1999, right after amalgamation. But the majority of tournaments use their 72-hour block that we set aside. And then if the tournament is bigger than that 72-hour block, they will use the regular programming to supplement the tournament.
yeah, those were actually 2 separate questions between the 72-hour in the two rinks. But this one here, I just want to make sure for clarification that people weren't expecting fall, winter to be, it depends on how it's written, how it's read. So 2 during the fall and 2 during the winter. Okay, thank you. And 3.16.3, curfew ice. Can you just confirm that definition, please? Because I have no clue.
My apologies, Ms. Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So what curfewed ice means is that for the most part, the typical rental is 50 minutes of ice time, whether that starts on the half hour or starts on the hour. We do have competitive, more so in hockey, and some ringette, where the competitive teams will play an hour and 20-minute game. The Recreation and Leisure Services Department works with those organizations ahead of time to make sure that they have enough ice time booked, number one. Number two, that we know what the schedule is of the game and that we know when we need to curfew. So where the curfew really comes in is for tournaments and special events. We really like to make sure that things are running on time because if there is a tournament, let's say that runs from 6 a.m. until 8 p.m. on a Saturday night, and we do have user groups that are coming on after that tournament, we want to make sure that we hold as close to that 8 p.m. as we possibly can so that we're not, we don't have 3 or 4 groups backed up after that.
I can understand that. I've been in some soccer and ball tournaments, which are delays and delayed and backed up. Last question, maybe. 3.17.3, in regards to the insurance requirements. More specifically, in regards to those, like say individuals, not organizations as such, how they go about getting insurance, and also for confirmation, we had one last year where a counselor decided to rent some ice for skating during March break.
Ms. Turner?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So the city has, for individual users, casual users, the city has an insurance provider. It's BFL. So when you would either call in or email in, if you were to book through Mr. Flindle, at that time, he would let you know what the price for the insurance was going to be, and that would be added to your permit, which gives coverage of $5 million, which is standard across the corporation.
Thank you. One final question. With new sports coming in line in different age groups and different many genders playing hockey now and other sports, broomball, ringette, is there becoming a strain on our facilities at the current time?
Ms. Turner?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Excellent question, Councillor Shaves. There is not currently a strain on our facilities. On most non-tournament weekends, we have ice that sits available at 2 pads throughout the city. We obviously do work, our staff works hard to fill those hours as much as what we possibly can, but that's additional ice that is picked up by our organizations. It's not ice that's actually part of their regular allocation. So no strain on the facilities at this time, but our staff is also, through the user group meetings, watching trends in sport to see where we're going, where we sit.
Thank you. That's all for me.
Just a quick comment. Having coached,
Are you giving back the chair or just making comment? No. Okay. Keeping the power.
I return the chair.
Councillor Amos.
Thank you. Just a quick comment. Having coached hockey for a number of years and played hockey, the recommendations the staff are making make total sense. They are in line with what makes for a very efficient system and also allows for the user groups to run efficiently in their own patterns. So well done to staff.
Any further questions at this point? Okay, then I need a mover and seconder to put the motion on the floor. Councillor Ridge, Councillor Sanik. All those in favor? Motion passed. On to next item of business, report received from Arts Advisory Committee. Item.
I can happily just introduce that. So that is just the report card coming up from the Arts Advisory Committee. The Arts Advisory Committee is one of only two committees that actually, advisory committees that report to a standing committee. So that's why it's a little bit more different than some of the other report cards you have seen in the last couple months. It just goes over the mandate of the committee, the work that it achieved over the previous calendar year, and any changes in the membership of the committee over the past year.
Any questions from the committee? That being said, motion, mover and seconder. Councillor Sanik, Councillor Stephen. All those in favor? Motion passes. There are no motions. There are no notice of motions. There's no other business, no correspondence. Next meeting is scheduled for August 10th at 6 p.m. Do we have a motion, a mover and a seconder for adjournment? That wasn't loud enough. Councillor Amos, second by Councillor Sanik. All those in favor? Passed. Motion adjourned, or meeting adjourned.